for ignoring my parents 20 years after they jokingly abandoned me? My name is Natalie Foster. I am 32 years old. I am a graphic designer in Denver, Colorado, and this morning I woke up to 29 missed calls from a number with an area code I have not used in 2 decades, but that my body recognized even before my brain processed the digits. I froze with the cell phone in my hand long enough for my coffee to get completely cold. Cooper, my dog, just stared at me from the corner of the couch with those eyes of someone who knows something is wrong, but does not know how to help. I understand exactly how he feels. Before hitting play on any message I already knew. Not because I am clairvoyant, not because some mystical intuition warned me. I knew because I know the pattern. 20 years of silence and suddenly 29 calls in a single early morning only happen when something collapses. And when what collapses involves Illinois and that specific area code, it can only be one thing. Let me tell you about the little girl I was before becoming Natalie Foster. I grew up in Riverton, Illinois, one of those small towns where everyone knows your family's name before they know yours. My parents had a chain of hardware and home goods stores, the kind of place that sells discounted pots, bedspreads, coffee makers, and that printer you buy thinking you are going to use it every day. From the outside, we were the perfect family. My dad grilled burgers on Sundays. My mom waved to the neighbors through the window. The stores had the family's last name on the sign. On the inside, love was a bargaining chip, and I lived eternally in debt. My mom loved the word lesson. She had one for every situation. If I cried, the lesson was that I was too sensitive for the real world. If I asked for help, the lesson was that dependent people got nowhere. If I forgot something, the lesson was about responsibility. She transformed every normal childhood mistake into a spectacle of humiliation, and my dad watched with the satisfied smile of someone watching his favorite team score a goal. When I was 8 years old, I asked for some sneakers at the mall because the soles of mine were falling apart. My mom took me to a bench near the food court. She told me I had to learn that the world did not owe anyone anything, and she left me there. I sat there for almost 3 hours smelling that caramel corn from the stand next door, trying not to cry because I had already learned that my tears were entertainment for them. When they finally returned, my dad asked my mom if he owed her $20 because he had bet that I would still be in the same spot I had been. He had bet on my paralysis as a scared little girl. At 10 years old, after a soccer game where a group of kids from school made fun of me in the parking lot, my parents left me alone on the other side of the field after dark because tears were a weakness and weakness attracted worse treatment. I sat on the concrete sidewalk hugging my own knees as the cars drove away one by one. My dad thought it was funny that I had not tried to ask a stranger for a ride. He said he had bet that I would try. There was always a bet, there was always a lesson, there was always a way to make my pain seem like a joke that only they understood. The only place where I existed outside of their rules was on paper. I drew everywhere, on the back of receipts, in the margins of notebooks, in cheap sketchbooks I bought with the money I earned babysitting. I drew rooms with locked doors, train windows with light on the outside, women on mountain peaks with no one around. At 12 years old I could not have explained what those images meant, but now I know. I was trying to draw myself a way out of my own life. What made everything escalate was a grade, not in math, not in science, in art. The only subject that made me feel alive. I got a B+. I was proud until I opened the front door and saw my mom holding the report card as if it were a document of moral failure. How is it that a girl who spends all her time drawing manages to disappoint exactly in the one class she claims to like? My dad said that maybe I had become lazy. My mom said that maybe I thought effort was enough. That night, sitting in my room pretending to do homework, I heard their voices in the kitchen. Low with that amused tone that always made my stomach tie in knots. My mom said I needed a lesson I would not forget. My dad said he bet I did. The next morning they were radiant. My mom made pancakes. My dad asked if I wanted orange juice. They said we were going for a drive to Chicago, just the 3 of us. And for a foolish, desperate second I thought maybe they were trying to start over, that maybe the fight over the report card was over, that maybe this was the closest form of an apology my family could offer. I should have known better. The trip from Riverton to Chicago felt wrong from the beginning, but I could not exactly pinpoint what it was. My dad kept the radio turned all the way up and tapped his hands on the steering wheel, as if he were in a good mood. My mom kept turning around from the passenger seat to ask me questions that I clearly could not answer correctly. I thought I was so smart. Smart girls were prepared for the real world. Life was not going to care if I was scared. Every answer I gave seemed to amuse them. Every silence I tried to keep made them press harder. When the Chicago skyline appeared through the window, that familiar tightness had already returned to my chest. The kind of tightness that said something bad is coming and you will not be able to prepare for it. We parked near the main bus terminal around noon. I had never seen anything so big and so crowded at the same time. The terminal looked like an entire city compressed under a single roof. Men in suits with rolling suitcases, families with small children, tourists with maps in their hands. Everyone moved as if they knew exactly where they were going. I stuck close to my parents because I did not know where else to be. Inside the main hall, my mom pointed to a large column near the entrance and told me to wait there while they moved the car and bought something to eat. 15 minutes, she told me. Maybe 20. I asked to go with them. My dad laughed so hard that people around us turned to look. He said I was 12 years old, not 2. My mom leaned in and whispered to me not to embarrass her in public. I stood by the column. The first 15 minutes I convinced myself that the parking lot was full. At 30 that the food line was long. At 45 the tightness in my chest had turned into physical pain. After an hour my heart was beating so fast I could hear it. I had $15 in my pocket, no cell phone, no directions written down anywhere. No idea how the buses worked. I started walking a few feet away from the column, and then ran back because they had told me not to move. Even in the midst of panic, a part of me was still afraid of making a mistake. The terminal got louder as the afternoon went on. Every announcement over the loudspeaker made my heart jump. Every dark-haired woman made me turn my head. Time stretched in a way that felt purposeful, as if the clock knew it was torturing me and was enjoying it. Then I saw the car driving slowly down the street outside. Our car. My whole body gave a leap of relief so strong I almost stuttered with joy. I ran to the glass waving with both arms. For a split second I truly believed they had come back. My dad was driving. My mom was in the passenger seat. They were both looking right at me. My dad smiled first. Not the relieved smile of someone who found a lost child. The smile of someone who just saw the joke reach the exact punchline he expected. My mom rolled down the window and leaned out just enough so I could hear her over the traffic noise. I bet $100 you cannot even find your way back home. Then she laughed. My dad laughed with her. He took one hand off the wheel and made a stupid thumbs-up gesture, as if he were congratulating himself for doing something clever. The car kept moving and disappeared into the traffic. I stood there until someone walked past me and said, "Excuse me." And the sound of a stranger's voice brought me back into my own body. I ran back inside the terminal because I did not know what else to do. I paced back and forth, crying at times and wiping my face every few minutes. Because I was still ashamed of being seen showing emotion. I had been trained for that too. I tried to think of someone to call. There was no one. I tried to imagine the route back. My house might as well have been in another country. At some point I stopped waiting for them to return. At some point the waiting ended and the abandonment began. The difference might seem small, but when you are 12 years old it is like falling into freezing water. I stayed inside the bus terminal for almost 3 hours after they left. Long enough for the light outside to start changing. Long enough for me to stop thinking in complete sentences and start moving on pure instinct. I stayed away from the doors because I was afraid of going out into the city and getting even more lost. Away from the police because my parents always told me that if I caused trouble the authorities would make everything worse. Away from strangers because the very people who abandoned me had spent years teaching me that asking for help was a weakness. Looking back, that was one of the cruelest parts of what they did. They trained me not to trust anyone, and then left me in a place where trust was the only thing that could have saved me quickly. The person who finally noticed me was a terminal employee named Mrs. Diane Parker. She was in her 50s with tired eyes and that calm voice of someone who has already seen too much to be easily surprised. Apparently she had seen me walk past the same row of seats and vending machines several times. She stopped me near a hallway and asked if I was lost. I lied immediately. I told her I was waiting for my parents. She asked how long ago. I told her I did not know. She asked if I had eaten yet. That was the question that undid me. I started crying so hard I could barely breathe. All the shame I had swallowed since noon came rushing out, ugly and uncontrolled. I told her I had been left behind, that the car had driven past the front of the terminal and they had laughed, that my mom had bet money on whether I could find my way back home. Mrs. Diane Parker did not react the way my parents would have. She did not shush me, she did not accuse me of being dramatic. She crouched down a bit to be on my level, and told me with a clarity that still resonates with me. You are safe now and I am going to help you. They called security, then the police. One officer took my statement while another checked the cameras at the main entrance of the terminal. They were able to confirm that I had been standing there for a long time, and that a car matching my description had slowed down near the curb before driving away. That mattered later. When they finally reached my parents on the phone, I only heard half of the conversation. But I will never forget the expression on the officer's face. It went from professional caution to total disbelief in about 10 seconds. He asked them if they were going to return to Chicago immediately. He stayed quiet for a long time. He listened and said, "No, ma'am, leaving a 12-year-old girl at a bus terminal is not a lesson in independence, it is child abandonment." My whole body went cold when I heard those words, not because they sounded too harsh, but because they fit. By nightfall, I was sitting in a small interview room with a social worker from Child Protective Services while they prepared a report. She explained that since my parents refused to return immediately and kept insisting that it had been a parenting decision, I could not just be sent home. There would be an emergency placement in a temporary foster family until the family court reviewed the case. I did not understand much of the legal jargon, but I understood her look. She believed me. More than that, she believed I had not been safe since long before that day. I was terrified when they told me I would spend the night with the foster family. I had grown up hearing stories about what happened to kids the government took away, but then I met Michael and Susan Foster. They were not glamorous, they did not try to look perfect. He was a photographer with ink stains on his fingers from developing photos. She was a preschool teacher and smelled slightly of lotion and classroom paper. Their house was warm and messy. In that way places have where people truly live. There was a lamp on in the entryway, framed family photos on the wall, a dog bed in the corner, although the dog was sleeping somewhere in the backyard. Susan asked me if I preferred chicken noodle soup or grilled cheese sandwiches. Michael asked me if I preferred the hallway light on or off at bedtime. No one yelled at me when I told them I did not know. No one laughed at me for starting to cry at the table after taking 2 bites and realizing I was too exhausted to pretend I was okay. That first night in the guest room I barely slept. Every car door closing outside made me tremble. Every creak in the hallway made me sit bolt upright. But even through all that fear, one thought kept spinning in my head. A stranger at a bus terminal had shown me more kindness in 5 minutes than my own mother had shown me in years. I did not have the vocabulary for it yet. I just knew the world suddenly felt different. And once you see that other people are capable of protecting you, it becomes impossible to keep calling cruelty normal. The following days were like living inside someone else's life. I went from the foster's house to meetings with social workers, then to psychological evaluations, and later to a family court where adults spoke in careful tones about my future, as if it were something fragile and urgently important at the same time. My parents showed up with a lawyer and the exact same attitude they always had at home. Calm, offended, slightly amused that anyone was taking this so seriously. My mom wore a navy blue blazer and pearl earrings, as if looking respectable erased what she had done. My dad leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, with the attitude of someone who is just waiting for an annoyance to pass. They did not deny leaving me at the bus terminal. That was the unbelievable part. They admitted it. They just insisted it had been something controlled, educational, necessary. My mom said they were trying to build resilience. My dad said kids in this country had become too soft and someone had to teach them how the real world worked. I sat across from them listening to that and realized something that changed me more than the bus station itself. They were never going to become the kind of parents who understood what they had done. If they were capable of that kind of honesty, they would have turned around before even hitting the highway. The court psychologist's report described a pattern of emotional abuse, humiliation, neglect, and an escalation of risky behaviors. Those words were not mine, but hearing them out loud was like oxygen entering a sealed room. For years I had thought my childhood was somehow my fault because it was easier than believing the people responsible for me were choosing to hurt me on purpose. The report made it clear. It had not been a misunderstanding, it had not been a strict parenting style, it had been abuse disguised in middle-class language. When the judge finally asked me if I wanted to return home while the court monitored the family, I said no so quickly that the answer seemed to surprise even myself. My mother looked at me as if I had slapped her. My dad muttered something about being an ungrateful brat. The next phase was supposed to be a path to reunification. Parenting classes, family therapy, supervised visits, periodic reviews. On paper it seemed fair. In reality, my parents treated it like a public insult. They hated the idea of being evaluated. They hated the supervision. They hated that teachers, therapists, and court officials now had access to the private face of the family they had spent years polishing for everyone. My dad complained more about the damage to his store's reputation than about losing my custody. My mom kept saying she was not going to let the government tell her how to raise her own daughter. And then, in the most important moment of the whole process, they were given a choice. They could commit to a 2-year reunification program and do everything the court demanded, or they could voluntarily surrender their parental rights. They chose to surrender them. Just like that. My chest did not break in the courtroom, as you might imagine. It grew strangely quiet. I had spent my whole life trying to be good enough to stop them from turning against me, and in the end they gave me up to protect their own pride. That was the truth that stayed with me the longest. They did not lose me because the system took me away from them. They handed me over to preserve their ego. After that, things moved faster. The Fosters were already a certified foster family through Child Protective Services, and in the following months they became something completely different. Michael started setting aside old photography magazines and art books for me because he had noticed how much I drew. Susan knocked on the door before entering my room, which seems like such a small thing until you grow up in a house where privacy does not exist. They learned which foods gave me anxiety because of old punishments related to dinner. They stopped demanding that I look them in the eye when I was upset. They did not demand love or gratitude or immediate trust from me. They just stayed. Consistency can seem almost supernatural to a girl who has never had it. The adoption was finalized after enough time had passed for everyone to pretend the process had been orderly, but emotionally it had already happened long before the judge signed the final papers. When they asked if I wanted to change my name, I did not hesitate. Lila Bennett belonged to a girl who had stood at a bus terminal with $15 in her pocket, having no idea if she would still have a family by the end of the day. Natalie Foster belonged to someone else, someone with her own room, a drafting table with art supplies, and a family that did not laugh when she was scared. I still remember the first night after the adoption became official. Susan put clean sheets on my bed, like she always did on Sundays. Michael left a new sketchbook on my desk and no one gave me any speech about how very lucky I should feel. They acted as if I had always been theirs. That quiet certainty healed more in me than any dramatic moment ever could have. It taught me that real love does not test you to prove you deserve it. Real love makes room for you even before you know how to settle into it. The healing did not happen all at once and it definitely was not in a straight line. For years my body still reacted to kindness as if it might be a trap. If Susan told me she would be back in 15 minutes after going to the store, I had to fight the urge to stare out the window until her car appeared. If Michael was late picking me up from a school activity because of traffic, I felt panic rise so fast that my hands would go numb. I hated waiting in public places. I hated being told to stay still. I hated the phrase, "I will be right back." Therapy helped, but it was slow work. The kind of work that forces you to say awful truths out loud until your nervous system slowly begins to believe what your mind wants it to know. I learned the words trauma, emotional abuse, and hypervigilance. I learned that being hurt repeatedly does not make you stronger the way cruel people claim. It makes you adapt to danger. It makes you brilliant at surviving and terrible at resting. Through all this, the Fosters never pressured me. They went to school events, they helped me with homework. They remembered what subjects triggered me, and let me keep my bedroom door closed when I needed space. They did not try to erase what had happened. They helped me build a life where that was no longer the only thing that defined me. Art became more than an escape. It became my structure, my language, my proof that I could create something beautiful without anyone's permission. I immersed myself in it throughout high school, then in college applications, and later in every portfolio review and studio session, until the early hours of the morning after getting into the art and design program at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Going back to the city that once terrified me was not symbolic at first. It was practical. The school was the right fit for me. The curriculum was very good, but at some point during those years I realized I was taking something back. The same city where I had been abandoned became the place where I rebuilt myself. I studied graphic design, worked part-time, went to therapy, and learned how to exist around people who did not demand that I make myself small. After graduating, I took a job in Denver, Colorado at a visual identity agency for small businesses, and for the first time in my life I lived far enough away from Illinois to feel that geography itself was on my side. Denver gave me space, new streets, new habits, a new climate. Eventually I started taking freelance clients and later opened my own studio. I built a reputation based on telling clear visual stories, the kind of work that helped people clearly state who they were and what they stood for. Sometimes the irony of this was almost funny. My entire career grew out of having spent my childhood trapped inside other people's lies. I met Nathan through a friend at a housewarming party. He was a systems engineer, patient in a way that did not feel acted and very hard to upset. On our third date, I told him I had a complicated family history. On the fifth, I told him a little more. Months later, when I finally told him about the bus terminal, he did not interrupt me. He did not overreact, nor did he offer me that lazy phrase that everything happens for a reason. He just reached across the table, took my hand and said, "This never should have happened to you." The simplicity of that almost undid me. We built our life the same way I had rebuilt myself. Slowly, deliberately, and with room for honesty. We got married in a small ceremony. Michael walked me down the aisle and Susan adjusted the back of my dress, trying not to cry. We adopted a rescue dog named Cooper, a street dog with a torn ear, and the cautious soul of something that had also been abandoned too soon. I blocked every account my biological parents tried to use to contact me. Facebook, Instagram, old emails. I even changed my number once after a voicemail from an Illinois area code left me shaking for an hour. I did not talk about them unless it was necessary. I did not visit Riverton. I did not use my old name. Most days I could go whole weeks without thinking about Lila Bennett. That was the life I had built when the calls came. A good marriage, a studio with steady clients, morning walks with Cooper, dinners with friends, Sunday calls with Michael and Susan. A life so quiet and complete that sometimes I wondered if peace always felt this strange to people who did not grow up fighting for it. Then my phone lit up with 29 missed calls from Illinois and the floor beneath all of that shifted. There was a voicemail, then an email from an address I did not know, then a message request on LinkedIn, the only platform I had kept public for work reasons. It was that detail that made me understand that this had taken effort. Someone had done their research. Someone had finally connected Natalie Foster to the little girl they had laughed at out the car window. I sat at the kitchen counter with my phone in my hand while Cooper pressed against my leg, and Nathan watched the color drain from my face. I had spent 20 years making sure the past stayed buried. Whatever was happening now had dug it up with both hands. The voicemail was not from my mom. It was from my younger sister, Lily. I had not heard her voice since she was little, following me down the hallway in mismatched socks, too young to understand why the air in our house always felt heavy. Her voice sounded older, rougher, the way voices get when life has weighed them down. She told me our mom had advanced stage cancer, that our dad had suffered a mild stroke 6 months prior, that the stores had closed, not that they were struggling but that they had closed one by one, shut down or sold at a loss after the family history I thought was buried in court records resurfaced in the worst possible way for them. A relative had posted about the bus terminal incident in a local Facebook group after my mom, in a stunning act of hypocrisy, left a comment on a parenting post talking about how kids these days needed firmer discipline. That comment opened the door. Former neighbors started talking. A retired civil registry employee hinted that the rumors were true. Someone found an old small newspaper clipping about a child abandonment investigation, linked to a family from the municipality. The image they had spent decades cultivating collapsed in public quickly and uglily. Customers stopped going. People preferred to drive to the big chains in the next town over rather than give them another dime. Their church friends stayed silent. Community groups stopped calling. Riverton, which had once protected them with gossip and politeness, turned against them using those exact same tools. Lily said they were now living in a low-income apartment on the outskirts of town. No house, no stores, no status, no version of their old family to hide behind. Then she said the phrase that explained exactly why there had been 29 calls instead of a single respectful message. They wanted me to come back. Not because they had suddenly become different people, not because time had made them brave enough to face the truth, but because they had run out of options and were terrified of dying alone. I asked Lily why she was calling if she knew I had every reason not to answer. There was a long pause and then she said, "Because I wanted you to hear it from someone who is not lying to you." She told me that she had also cut contact, not years ago but recently, after becoming a mother and finally requesting copies of the court files to understand what had really happened when I disappeared from the family. Our parents had spent years telling her a watered-down version, that I had exaggerated, that the government had exaggerated, that I had been manipulated by foster parents who wanted a daughter. Lily said reading those files was like getting hit by a truck. She looked at her own son after that and realized she could never let people like that get near him. Hearing that should have made me feel triumphant. Instead, it made me feel tired in a place deeper than anger. She asked if I would go. I told her I would think about it. Nathan told me I did not owe them anything. Susan said that regardless of my choice, it had to be for my own peace, not for their comfort. Michael said very quietly that some people only look for the bridge after burning down the house. I stayed awake thinking about that all night. By morning I knew one thing clearly. I was not going back to save them. I was going back to put an end to it with my own voice. I flew to Chicago 2 days later, and drove the rest of the way to the hospital where my mom was receiving treatment. The room smelled of disinfectant and stale fear. My dad looked older than I imagined, smaller too. As if illness and shame had finally stripped away the ordinary man underneath the performance. My mom still had that instinctively made-up face, even halfway through the illness, as if dignity were something that could be applied like lipstick. For a second no one spoke. Then my mom started crying before I even sat down. Not a silent cry, it was the kind of cry designed to get attention. She said my name, the old one. I corrected her once and only once. "Natalie." She nodded, wiping her face, and my dad said they had made mistakes. Mistakes. The same cowardly word people use when the truth is too awful to say out loud. I told them no. A mistake is missing an exit on the highway. A mistake is forgetting the milk at the grocery store. What they did was deliberate. They left a 12-year-old girl at a bus terminal in a city she did not know. They laughed while she panicked and then spent 20 years lying about it to protect themselves. My dad started to speak, probably to explain himself, but I had not gone all the way there to listen to another defense wrapped in softened language. I told them they had turned my fear into a game, and the reason they were sitting there now, with no businesses, no respect, and neither of their 2 daughters by their side, was because games end. People catch on, kids grow up. The truth catches up even with small towns that think silence can bury everything. My mom asked if I could forgive them. I told her that forgiveness was not a debt I owed to people who only sought me out when their lives fell apart. And I told them the sentence I had carried in one way or another since I was 12 years old. You bet on whether I could find my way back home. I found it. I just did not go back to yours. They both cried then, but for the first time their tears did not move me at all. I was not cruel, I did not yell, I did not insult them. That was the part that surprised me the most. Revenge, when it finally arrived, was not loud. It was cold, clear, exact. I told them I would not pay bills, I would not take care of them, nor would I reestablish contact. I told them Lily had every right in the world to protect her son from them. I told them my family was in Denver and in Illinois with the people who had truly earned that word. Then I stood up. My dad asked if that was really goodbye. I looked at him and said, "Goodbye was 20 years ago. You are just the last ones to understand it." I left after 20 minutes and did not look back. In the parking lot the air felt thin and bright. I stood there with my hands shaking, not from regret, but from that strange liberation that comes when something that torments you finally takes a shape you can leave behind. On the flight back I thought about the girl at the bus terminal, the one who had believed that being abandoned meant being unwanted forever. She was wrong. She was unwanted by 2 broken people who confused cruelty with strength, but she was not unworthy of being loved. There is a difference, and learning it saved my life. If there is any lesson in what happened to me, it is this. Abuse does not become discipline just because a parent uses cleaner words to call it that. Humiliation does not build character. Fear does not make kids stronger. It just makes them age before their time. And walking away from the people who hurt you, even if they share your blood, is not bitterness. Sometimes it is the healthiest thing you will ever do in your life. I did not leave that hospital feeling guilty. I left feeling educated by my own survival. The family you are born into may shape your wounds, but it does not have the right to define your future. Real love does not laugh when you are scared. A real family does not test you to see if you can survive without them. Real healing begins the moment you stop calling cruelty a lesson and start calling it what it was. And once you do that, you can build a life so honest, so stable, and so full of peace that not even the people who broke you can take it away. Cooper was waiting for me at the door when I got to Denver with that torn ear, and that cautious look of someone who was also abandoned too soon. I crouched on the floor, wrapped my arms around him, and for the first time in a long time I felt that the weight of the previous 20 years had found a place to land that was no longer my own chest. Comment. I felt this story deep in my chest today. It reminded me how important it is to protect your own peace, even when it means walking away from what hurts. I hope you pause for a second and ask yourself if the people around you make you feel safe and valued. True kindness from strangers or chosen family can heal what blood never could. Healing takes time and courage, but it always starts with choosing yourself. I want you to know that setting boundaries is an act of self-respect, not rejection. You deserve relationships that bring calm instead of constant tests. If this touched something in you today, I hope it gives you the push to prioritize your own heart. Let's all keep learning how to build the kind of love that lasts. Thanks for sharing this moment with me. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.